This evening's Dharma talk is titled Thought Number 2, and we're also in Snowshoe, Pennsylvania, where we're halfway between Sokukoji and New York, headed for New York and to do some teaching there. So we're at a bed and breakfast here in Snowshoe. Bunyo and Chezan and Gokudo are also here with me. So I'll talk a little bit about thought number 2 and invite questions to come through from others if you have them. So the idea there with thought number 2 is not so much to encourage you or anyone to stop the thought process or interfere with it, but more to bring awareness to the thoughts as they arise and to see them and to see the way there seems to be something that you could call, as Trungpa Rinpoche referred to this same situation, a similar situation of first thought, best thought. He was doing an evaluation. I'm not particularly interested in doing it that way, although that may be helpful to you, so I would leave it up to you. But I would say that thought number 2 is like seeing that they tend to multiply. The first impression, which I think what Rinpoche was referring to is actually not a thought. It's just a first reception of something. It feels like you could call it a thought, but it's actually just on the receiving end, whereas the second situation, or thought number 2, actually is some kind of a interpretation of what just arose. Evaluation, interpretation, condemnation, acceptance, celebration, on and on. But what it does is it's extra, and it cuts into or overlays or clouds the immediacy of that first reception of whatever is occurring. So the idea is to watch the way they build up. If you can see that through awareness, without meddling with it, without moving it into a whole train of thoughts about this or that or the other thing, evaluating, so on. So the idea of thought number 2 is see that second thought. We can call it second, but it's just something else that arises. Something happens, and then we add to it. Then we add something. We think no, it's not that. It must be, or it couldn't be this. It must be. And we actually abandon the very immediacy of that which is arising, which may be in your thought stream. It may be the thought stream that is appropriating or receiving the images or sounds, smells, taste, touch, whatever that's coming out of your immediate environment. But keep it very simple. As I've said before, one of the terms in the production, different in the arts, is a minimalism, a kind of art that's very, very, not much, very simple, very minimalistic. Less is better. And so you may also have the situation arise where nothing does get added. If that starts to occur, what the self-centered mind does is get a credential from that. So you're adding in a different way. You're actually thinking, oh, I'm not having a thought. I'm not having a second thought. I'm in an open dimension. This is just not true. And as you've heard me say many times, and this I'm saying it again, and questions are good around this area. This is a difficult thing to use relative language, conversation, concepts, pointers, and to point to something that is, to use another word, is ineffable. Doesn't have a front or back. Doesn't even have a credential. Has nothing in time and space. It's there, and it is the nature of your consciousness. Its fundamental nature. The word is Dharmata, Buddha nature, Tathagata. So that's the case all the time, but it is covered over with clouds and smoke and ideas and opinions and hopes and fears and all the the 8 worldly dharmas and the success and failure, that the culture, not only the culture, but even in our small sangha, we tend to buy into that. Something's getting better, something's getting worse. And it's not that it isn't. So we're not trying to obliterate relative truth. We are endeavoring through this practice of the Buddha's Dharma, or awakened truth, to see what is fundamentally true, so that when we do function in the relative world, that is coming out of a clarity that is total. When clarity is really total, there isn't anyone who's clear. There's nothing you're being clear about. The content situation has maybe gone away altogether. You just see what is without any kind of understanding in a relative sense that would, in past times, would have been supportive to your self-centeredness, your narcissism. A function of what's in Yogacara tradition is the seventh consciousness, or the ego mind, the klesha mind, the self-love, self-reference, self-pride, and self-whatever that other one is. Yogino.
Is a second thought the beginning of making up a story about something? Linearity?
It can be, unless you see that it's arising. And if you see, it's just fine if it arises. It's just that if you don't do anything with it, there may be even 3 more. Maybe, but you're aware of it. But the awareness is not going anywhere. The awareness does not get magnetized or seduced into following that thought pattern. So this is the area where it's, the fancy word is, I don't know what other than in English, I don't know what the Sanskrit is, but discriminating awareness, wisdom. It sees contrasts and differences, but it's a wisdom mind, so therefore it doesn't join anything, doesn't refute anything, it doesn't shut down or close off anything. So it just notices the texture. It's like watching the branches in a tree move because of the wind. It's that kind of appreciation, and you could say that kind of objectivity, or that kind of dispassion, where there's no the appreciation is there, or the reception of that is there, but there's no joining, no making an alliance, no forming an opinion or idea about that. And if we do that, the process for those who are strong meditators, eventually you'll notice that start to come in, and then it'll stop. You might even notice it come in all the way, and because you see it so clearly, it just keeps on going. So you kind of blank out. There's kind of a gap between what you're seeing and what you're knowing and what you're understanding and what you're taking to the bank, or what you're valuing as something or disvaluing as not important. Any kind of adjustment. More? Yes?
I just wondered if you didn't realize your second thought until you're already into the 4th or 5th thought, how would you see the first thought? And is that important?
Yeah, and that's why it's called practice, and that's why we spend time sitting down, holding still, and just watching what shows up. So it's practice. You may get into the idea of 1, 2, 3, third thought, 5th thought, but probably not. It's usually just that the second situation that starts to arise. You actually can feel yourself turn away from something. You're turning away, and you're settling for some kind of very low level conclusion. Go ahead. Jason.
Our second, third, or continuing thoughts spontaneous?
Yes. Yes, they're. I mean, they could be spontaneous in the sense that they're just coming out of the causes and conditions, including your own neurosis, your own fear, which is dependently arisen. It could be coming out of that, but that's why the awareness is so important, rather than trying to shut it down or change it or be somebody else, which it's not that you can't succeed at that, but it's circular, and it won't last. It's a temporary fix, so to speak. Go ahead.
If something is spontaneous, can it still be an addition?
It might show up that way initially. Could be spontaneous and I mean, that whole area, it's very, when there's a lot of awareness in that area of that kind of craziness or that kind of insanity, but there's a lot of awareness about that. One is beginning to actually, you could say, begin to understand more deeply the way we create our own issues and our problems. You might have to do that for a while. There might be the momentum or the causes and conditions behind that might be such that no matter how much you're aware of it, you're still going to know that you're confused or that you're having difficulty. It's the going in and trying to use relative truth to fix that brings it back into the mundane realm and makes it maybe a temporary success. Anybody that sit down and do mindfulness practice for any length of time is going to settle down quite a bit. It's not going to solve the fundamental issue, which is mistaken identity. Go ahead, please.
If one has clarity around the mistaken identity, do the additional thoughts continue to arise?
We could.
Mayun has a question.
Mm-hmm.
She asks, you talked about minimalism in art.
Yes.
Is the second thought something you would encourage to observe in a painting practice?
So I wouldn't, painters, as a Mayun, as you're a painter, I wouldn't interfere. I mean, you're asking me about this, but since I'm not there in that dynamic with you, I hesitate to say too much about that other than because the way it shows up for you, the way it shows up for 15 other people who are all painting pictures and working with visual space and arranging visual space, colors, shapes, contours, and so on. I think it's very important to emphasize the awareness part of that, the practice part of that, rather than make some kind of adjustments or some kind of commentary, unless I misunderstood what your question was.
Andrew from the monastery has a question. He asks, how are thoughts patterns?
How are thoughts patterns? Well, I think there could be a kind of patterning that happens just when there are causes and conditions that arise, and something happens, and we add on based on our own misunderstanding. So we tend to sew a web of patterns and repetition. We tend to repeat similar kinds of ways of shutting down, turning away, continuing to kick ourselves back into that loop, jump back on the merry-go-round, get back on the Ferris wheel, or on that rotation, success, failure, I'm getting there, I'm not getting anywhere, I'm doing really well, now I'm not doing so well. So there's a patterning there that can show up that way, that can be seen, and if the awareness gets strong, you might, it's, to use a real literal metaphor, it's almost like you raise above that and get kind of an aerial view of how you're functioning in your life. If you go in and try to repair something or fix something, to do that, you actually shut down the awareness that could actually see the proverbial big picture. So it's very necessary to see the pattern, the way we keep repeating and turning into something, turning something over in the same way, structuring something in the same way, over and over again. This is one of the things I think is just really interesting to me, is how if you come in and do a practice that has a very specific way of doing it, whether it's functioning as the doshi at the altar, whether it's doing the doan practice, whether it's just a han and bell out in the entry area to call people, the residents, to practice the 3 times a day, the 3 periods of the day. Certain kind of pattern that you're asked to do. So many strikes on the wooden fish, and so many strikes on the bell at different times, and then the large gong, and all of those things. And there's a certain way that, but every time you do that, I'm sure you've noticed, every time you do that, there's something different. It is something is slower in one area, faster in another. So there's a pattern there. But then we're endeavoring to hold that in a certain pattern, and so that the way we bring our awareness into that can, since we can't really repeat that exactly the same way, something about the awareness relative to the form, the separation is increased in such a way that that it allows our intelligence about the situation to show up. Especially if you're in a situation where nobody's requiring you to do it exactly a certain way. This is the form. Endeavor to follow the form best you can. And then the awareness practice is to notice how you can't quite do that. You can't quite imitate that exactly.
Sokuzan from the Monastery in Battle Creek has a question.
Yes.
She asks, how do we work specifically with self-blame when discursive thoughts are abundant?
So blaming, so the question is, how do we work with that? And I would say it's, as you've heard me say many times, is insofar as you can, just observe that, but not so much the story. Observe the story. I mean, if it's imminent and it's repetitive and it's in your face and it's a story, then you're going to have to work with that. But if you can, look at that and look at the texture, the quality of that. If you can look at it in such a way that you can feel the intensity, maybe even feel the negativity of it or feel the confusion of it, but you're not taking that into some kind of conclusion about, I'm really bad, I'm really screwed up, I've got to get better, or it's because of this and this and this is why I'm doing this. To actually make any kind of elaboration on it seems to cause more spinning, more thoughts being thrown out for this, that, and hooked together and destroyed and brought together and destroyed. So again, it's awareness. And I feel also the other practice I sometimes talk about is ASAP, alternating sense awareness. Sometimes I think if the mind is really wild that way, if you can go to the sense of touch, go to the sense of seeing or the sense of hearing, depending on however you would want to do that, or all three maybe, rotating around, and just don't do away with the discursiveness that is tumbling around like a rock polisher. But something that is where you bring other awareness, the awareness of sense of touch is very stable. You just feel your butt on the cushion of the chair, hands in your lap or in this mudra. And the breathing might be a little faster, a little slow, but generally it's just has a kind of stability that is fundamentally relative. And I'm not saying attached to it as an anchor particularly, but if you include that, you include random sounds outside of the building you're in or wherever you're at, or include the colors and shapes of that which is in front of you. At the same time, bring that in with you're receiving that. So receive that at the same time you're receiving the thought patterns that you are laying a judgment on, that they're confusing or that they're difficult or that bring up the question of how do I work with that. Saying allow that to do. Let that be the word in Tibetan is Rangjung, self-liberated. It's just that, and it's free. It comes out of relative truth, but seeing what it is, it's free. It's difficult to explain that. I don't know if I can say anything about it. I might be able to say more if you ask more.
Shoto at the Monastery in Battle Creek has a question.
Yes.
He asks, if we see we're on the merry-go-round, should we not fuel what's causing that spinning if it's something in our relative control?
Well, I'd have to get an idea of what you're referring to, but less is better. Just don't do it. Don't try to receive and try to see what's coming. You're in a monastery. You already have a really strong form. You have a schedule. You have a forum. You have a teacher. You have a sangha. You have work that you're doing, study, and you have work that you do to generate livelihood, to pay tuition and pay for what you need. Then I would say anything else that shows up, just don't do too much with it. I mean, ask the question, of course, but then my response is probably less is better. So it's that thought number 2, comes to thought number 3, and the feeling of that we can figure this out if we can just get the right connection or the right understanding or have the right response from me or the correct paragraph you read in the Lanka or something like that. You can somehow figure this, so we're looking for some kind of solution or some kind of, all of us do that. We all look for something else that will fix what this is or change what this is or change our dynamic. And I would say just let it feel like it feels. Just go into the texture of how it feels. Yeah.
Junshu from the monastery has a question.
Yes.
It's two parts. Does seeing a second thought mean seeing its content? Can it show up as a subtle feeling that we are thinking thoughts that we aren't even really aware of?
Yes. You got it. That's it. And here's the important part of this. Just keep doing that. There's nothing to adjust, nothing to correct. If you never see me again, just keep doing that. Keep looking at what moves. Watch what change and watch that nothing ever repeats itself. So yes, just keep doing that. You won't find a reference point. If you find one, it'll disappear. It'll vanish. It'll turn into a snake. You don't need a reference point. And ego needs a reference point to keep its credential going. I'm somebody, and I'm a Buddhist, and I have a path, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. But to transcend this, there isn't anyone left. Well, as Trungpa Rinpoche said, you just walk on ego like it's a shoe. You just wear it out. You don't fix it. You don't re-sole it, re-heal it, and you just walk on it. Yes, sir. Jason.
I was wondering if you could say something about, in regard to that analogy, spontaneous and gradual realization. And in particular, I feel like at one point you had mentioned that even the gradual path still is a spontaneous realization. So what is the gradual before the spontaneous?
Well, the gradual before the spontaneous is you have some kind of sense or some kind of inspiration or some kind of sometimes called bodhicitta, or some kind of inspiration to practice this. Like all of you can remember when you first heard about meditating, you first heard about Buddhism, you first came to the monastery. Something about this, that this is something that's really important. This is something I need to do. And you couldn't explain that to your brother or mother. Or can't explain that. It's something that goes kind of beyond that. So and so that's a gradual part of it. That happens, and then during that, or before it, or after it, or whenever, there's no way to know. Sometimes we get really intense insights that come and show up, and sometimes the ego mind wants to latch onto that and say, "Yes, now I got it. All I have to do is just hang on to this understanding, because now I know, I understand now," and that's it's just a high level of relative truth. It's just highly polished, but it can't last. It would be if it happened and you had the understanding where you weren't going to do anything with it, you're just going to let it lay there, it'd probably hang around a lot longer. My feeling of there being, that I had years ago, that arose in a retreat that I was in where the only way I could put it into words is nothing sleeps. That hung around for quite a long time, weeks. But I didn't tell anybody about it. I mean, what am I going to say? I can't say anything about it. So then it kind of eventually you forget about it. But then if you think about it, you think, yeah, it still seems that way. But it wasn't. It's not something you can lean on or get as a credential. But then the flashes you could get more flashes, or things could just slowly wear out. So you just realize that you don't go anywhere else anymore. You might not even notice it right away. You might just notice that you don't go anywhere else but right where you're at all the time, and it might look pretty ordinary to people around you.
It almost sounds like you can't gradually see Buddha nature. Can you gradually see Buddha nature? So what is the gradual what is gradually happening?
So nothing. It would be, if I used a strong metaphor, it would be like a door slowly opening. It'd be like something slowly, more and more and more light, or less and less aggression arising. And, you know, I mean, you're not doing anything about it. You're doing the best you can to be aware. You're practicing. You're looking at the Buddha's Dharma. You're looking at the concepts. Do good. Don't do harm. Be with all things. Save all beings. Put others before yourself. That kind of absolute or relative bodhicitta of generally just trying to help people. And then the absolute bodhicitta of, like it says in Atisha's 7 Points of Mind Training, be a child of illusion. Just don't abandon anything. Just it's always this right here, right now. And so that there's a momentary quality to it, and there's also something that shows up that kind of contradicts that and said it's always been this way. It's always you just see that you've filled up your Buddha nature, or your awakened mind, or your realization, or your understanding. You don't even use that fancy term. Just your understanding of what this is. From the time you were born, you've been filling it up with things, and loading it, and pushing it, and pulling it, and fighting with it, and then just don't do that anymore. So you could say, if we wanted to make a strong description of it, you could say you're always here. There isn't anything but this moment. Past and future are there, but they're very, they don't have much weight or something.
With our practice, I'm just wondering about how to approach practice with more of a emphasis on texture as opposed to progress, or texture as opposed to the evaluation over time.
So because the self-centeredness is so congealed into somebody who can win or lose, the success or failure, that starts to just go, if you just look at it and do nothing with it, it just can't live. It can't live in that with that kind of scrutiny. Buddha nature is like a brilliant light, but that light fades if there's any kind of movement to go this way or go that way based on some kind of orientation that has a center, like an ego. Nothing is separate from anything else. So the fundamental nature is you're here, and even though you have a physical form and you have eyes, you're looking out, you look at everywhere you look, all you see is this. And it's ordinary. And so what are you going to do? Have a beer. Or maybe not. I mean, I don't mean to be flippant about it, but I'm saying you're just here. But then you notice that people will struggle with the situation they're in. So then you are moved to help them so they don't have to do that. Or so that they can move away from that warfare. The whole world is, all you have to do is look around. It's just intense chaos and warfare and pushing and pulling. And to step into that and participate and work with that on their terms, on the terms of the world, the relative terms of these people are bad, even though they are maybe confused in a different way. It's better to train your mind to see clearly who you are and what this is yourself. More questions about that? Don't hesitate.
When I look at my practice, even though I've only been practicing a few years, it's very easy for me to emphasize the changes that have occurred that have made my life perhaps in some ways at least more tolerable.
Sure.
And I'm wondering about, I can't help it but to think, oh, meditation's helpful, or it's changed, or it's working, and it seems like that could be a bit of a sidetrack if I were to continue with that. I'm wondering about how to just come right back to the texture of right now in my practice right now.
Yeah. So this is what retreats are for, is to kind of give us a heavy dose of just this. And then we go out and we work in our everyday situation. Then it kind of builds up, and then we see we really need to go and look at this really closely again for a period of time. Everyone's a little different. And then you have the Sangha, relating to the Sangha every single day. These are other people who are also prioritized. Their life is about seeing the truth, the Buddha's Dharma, seeing awakened truth. and that's their motivation for being here. And I'm not saying taking anything away from someone practicing, and after a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, saying this is much better than what I was doing. I certainly had a intense contrast just in the first year. It was just intense. I mean, I realized I wasn't going to have to kill myself. It was quite a relief to meet Rinpoche and have him relate to me the way I can even put into words what that was like. Very difficult, other than meeting someone who wasn't anywhere else. And even though they had a great credential, it was a Buddhist, a tulku, an incarnation of the 11th Trungpa tulku, which was pretty impressive and so on. But he didn't use that at all. He just sat there and looked at you. Presence.
Can you develop that kind of presence?
You can stop obstructing it. Everyone is present. Everywhere, you know, this I've said this before, and other teachers have said, but everywhere you look, you see the Buddha. If you understand this, then you don't have some kind of special dispensation to be a great person, but you could be a well-known, you could be a nobody, you could be, you know, it could be a very simple, ordinary situation. You might not be a teacher at all, but there's nothing special about it. So, and that's why the ego mind is not so interested. It wants some kind of special highlights. People who claim they're awake or talk about it, you know what I mean. Talk about it in that way. It's not that there isn't something happening there. Probably is, or they wouldn't be talking about it. But it's still confused.
Is there a way we can begin to stop interfering with the natural presence?
It's through awareness, to see the way we keep having that extra thought. And so it's the awareness of the thought. It's not about stopping the thought. It's not about succeeding in not having any more thoughts. It's being really, if there's awareness of that, then it's all about the tension of passion and aggression and shutting down. So the thoughts are fine. It's just the thoughts are extremely powerful in magnetizing us into something else, into this idea that it should be, it shouldn't be, we're going this way, that shouldn't happen, they shouldn't say that, why are they looking at me that way? And very subtle kinds of things all the time. And to take it, what happens is not a happening, it's just that you stop believing those. You still have them, you still have the feeling, you still have you might even have some fear. You might have the trepidation, you might have the discomfort sitting in a room full, maybe sitting in a waiting room at your doctor's office looking across and feeling kind of self-conscious sitting there. It doesn't matter. There's nothing to change. You don't have to get rid of anything. But it's the awareness that sees that and sees that it's also not separate from the confusion it's looking at. Much different than being a person who is confused, who needs to stop being confused. So there's no person there. There's no. So therefore, this is the part that's you could say magical part of it. Is the perceiver is the same thing as what's being perceived. That's threatening to ego. Ego does not want to look at something and have its identity collapse into the whole thing. It's like death to the ego. Or
A question again from Junshu.
yes.
She asks, how is trying to stop obstructing our own natural presence and obstruction itself?
I think it's just simply put, it's the passion, aggression, and ignorance, the pulling, the pushing, and the shutting down. So it's just that kind of cartwheel motion of things going on and going on. It can get better, so it just magnetizes us because we do something and we say things are getting better. This is working. And then because of the causes and conditions that are untraceable, things start to change in another way. And then we impute or think that we've done something wrong. Or we haven't done this thing over here enough because it worked for a while. This is why the why questions are so, they're not wrong, it's just that they're, all they do, the why question with its answer, because of this, because of that, gives us a feeling of progress, this feeling of getting somewhere. And it reifies, validates, and solidifies this world, this three-dimensional world of time and space and everything that we're in our form, and we're here, and we're somebody. And in our situation, we're all four of us traveling in a car going to New York, where I don't even know what's going to happen there. I don't know what's happening now. It's not a credential. I'm not kind of getting I'm this great person who doesn't know what's happening, or somebody, there really isn't. It's very, very simple. So just don't obstruct it. As I think I said a few days ago, have the feelings. Don't get rid of your depression, your anger, your anxiety, your angst. Don't do anything with it. You're not going to be able to say it in a more relative way. You're probably not going to help other people very much if you're fighting with your own negativity. So make friends with this. Make friends with whatever this body, speech, mind is that looks like somebody, that looks like you. So now, when that's said, it's just stop going to war. Don't believe your thoughts. Don't disbelieve your thoughts. Don't shut down on them. Such a cheerful talk, don't you think? I miss all my homies out in front of me. Of course, these guys are pretty good. They'll be yes, Yogido.
You said you may never teach. So how does one on this path, the Bodhisattva path, fulfill the vow to save all beings without that?
Just meet everyone where they're at. That may involve teaching, it may not. You may not actually officially be a teacher. You may not even want to do that. In our situation, since you're sewing a robe to be a monk, then you're probably going to end up doing that on some level. It may be functioning as facilitating a book study. You may never, if you're going to do this, you're definitely going to do some teaching, because I'm going to make sure you do some teaching. But you may not really want to keep doing that. You might think, I'm a terrible teacher. I can't be doing this. I can't even know what the Buddha talked about. That's why you need to do it. I don't need teachers who know stuff. My feeling here is, with this small group of people that I have that are students of mine, I want to help these people become teachers, so that they can teach people directly out of their realization and not out of a bunch of stories. You're probably going to teach. You might not teach in a conventional sense, but if you're living in a monastery, then we're always functioning in some way as working with someone else, someone with difficulty. We're working to support their practice as sangha, so that's a form of teaching also. Very different. I'm sure you know. You lived you're in the monastery for 6 months or whatever length of time, and you're working with people. It might be difficult. Of course, it's difficult. Anytime you're dealing with, what do they say, herding cats. A monastery is like herding goats. It's even worse. Goats are very stubborn, and elevation is of no consequence. So, but what you do is you do that, but then by contrast, you go out into the world and relate to your neighbors, your other people who have no mind training at all, and you see how incredibly crazy people are. Even the people who present as being pretty, have their stuff together and everything, seem pretty. Still, there's a level of assumption that's going on there about you can see that there's not much space in what they say. They're very clear in the sense of the concepts, and they're able to tell you this or this or this, and what they believe, what they don't believe. They probably aren't going to be very good listeners, because they're so full of themselves. but maybe not difficult to be around. But then you come back to the monastery, it might be difficult, but the kind of community you have there, these people are trying to understand their minds and how this situation, what this is really about. We only have so much time to be alive. So, more. Yes.
Toji, who's staying at the monastery, has 2 questions. He asks, what role does compassion play in the process of making friends with ourselves? And secondly, how do we find that compassion?
So, simply put, you've heard me say this before, Toji, but just give yourself a break. You know, the negativity that arises as emotion, instead of just, it's like, you kind of have to depersonalize it a little bit. It's like just really bad weather. Nobody wants to be in a hailstorm, you know, with no steel helmet. You know, it hurts, or it's painful, or it's difficult, but don't take it somewhere else as if that shouldn't be happening. Take it personal. It must be because I deserve this, or I'm a bad person. We tend to have a second thought, third thought, fourth thought, a whole litany of things about that situation. So, but it's very difficult. It seems like the way in which we can begin to receive that kind of a feeling is through the sitting practice of meditation, where we sit down and we just receive whatever emotions are coming. So that's how we do it. And so when there's compassion, when there's a deep consideration would be a good word for our difficulty, for our craziness, or our spinning, or any other word you want to use to talk about how you might feel yourself, or anyone might feel. There's some consideration about it. That's where we start. If you haven't made friends here, or give this person a break, it's going to be hard to extend that to others without it seeming kind of, you know, like trying to be a compassionate person. You shouldn't try to be. I mean, there's other ways of teaching it where we deliberately do Tonglen and so on, which I don't particularly promote. Maitri Bhavana is probably the closest we come to that. And I just think that each person should do it themselves. We need to sit down, just like you do, Toji. You sit down, look at the wall. You spend many hours doing that yourself. And so, but then you have your own particular, whatever, chemistry, your own karma, the way your emotions come and go, and the kind of difficulties you have or someone else has. You have your own set of circumstances, or however you want to say, characteristics to deal with. Those are your dharma gates. Someone else next to you, right next to you, might not have any idea what that's even about. They just wouldn't understand why that, whereas their issues or their problems might show up in some area where you wouldn't understand that. So the way we do it is we're persistent, we see it, and we don't let anything, is sometimes said, to get the best of us. We don't, if the difficult emotion is really difficult, or some kind of aspect of our mind starts presenting itself as, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. You know, this is a way we build up into some kind of we start to armor ourselves with those concepts. Don't do that kind of lecturing. Go right into it and say, wipe me out. I mean, if you're going to say something to yourself, then just say, as it says, the Tibetan tradition, there's a saying there that thank you very much, I have no complaints whatsoever. We're lying through our teeth. But we may need to do that. And the other one may be, if it's better for me to be sick, let me be sick. If it's better for me to, you know, we're not talking to some kind of transcendental being. We're trying to understand the nature. If it's better for it to rain, let it rain. If thunder needs to happen, let there be thunder. So it's like, as a teacher back in the middle of the last century, Barry Stevens, in a book on meditation called I don't know, Watching the Water Flow or something like that, or the old Taoist situation is, look which way the water is flowing, and then say, go that way. Tell the water what to do. So it's, you know. I think persistently sitting down, holding still, watching what moves, getting up and sitting down with other people who are Sangha, other people who are trying to work with this in their own version of what you're asking about. Everyone has their own version of this. And that you have a community of people on the path who are not interested in right and wrong, not interested in you're correct, you're not correct, they're correct, you're not interested in that, interested in finding out how can we all help each other on this path, support ourselves with an environment, with a structure, and with a teaching and learning situation that fundamentally helps us focus on what is this? What is this about? What is it fundamentally? Not separate. That needs to be realized, and you can do that. If you're listening to me say this, what is there? A couple dozen people are listening to me. You know, maybe more join on YouTube, but that's not exactly the same thing. People look and they're on a spiritual supermarket. They're listening to me, then they listen to Muji, and then Adyashanti, and then Dalai Lama, and then trying to find, they get a little bit, and these are the people who say, well, everyone's my teacher. I have all kinds of teachers. Well, quite a nice circle was going on there, because it seems to be necessary to stop looking around. Don't look around. What you need is in front of you. Go ahead.
Another question from Sokuzan.
Yes.
She says, we've discussed how the mind obstructs fundamental presence. How does the mind support our practice?
Buddha nature is nothing but that support. So the everything it's doing everything is Buddha nature. It's just got lots of ruffles on it. There's lots of wrinkles, and so we put things on it. But this is Buddha nature. This is Buddha nature. This is Buddha nature. This movement through space of my hand is Buddha nature. And it was this, every time a Rumi raises his hand up like this is Buddha nature. I'm just using him as an example. With him it's obvious. Look at him. Not just him, but look at any child. There's something really powerful about the sense of presence and innocence that's there at the same time. It's like a kind of confidence that you can't track. So the strength is already there. Just don't obstruct it. And when I say don't obstruct it, you have to watch the way you obstruct it, so that through that observing, through that awareness, that obstruction starts to crack and fall away. Impermanent. Wears out. When the Clouds Part is the title of this book by Brunholzel. Something like that.
Kozan up in Traverse City.
Yes.
She asks, she's been unable to watch until about 10 minutes ago because of
But you missed the
construction
best part.
at her house. But she does have a question. What's the difference between receiving and accepting, especially as it regards making friends with ourselves?
Now, accepting is actually not accepting. Accepting is drawing a little tiny chit or a little tiny credential of, oh, I'll just accept this. Well, I'm just going to accept this. It's very sneaky to accept anything. Don't accept anything. Don't reject anything. Receiving means that it's headed for you. If it's an atomic bomb, hold still. Being silly, but I'm saying whatever it is, receive it. And if somebody throws a rock at you, probably should duck. I'm not saying be ridiculous about it, but just stay in the world, the immediacy of your world. And whatever's happening is don't add, no second thought, no thought number two. Or this shouldn't be happening, or now I'm getting it, or I'm just going to accept this. I don't think if I have said that, it's been many years ago. I just don't tell anybody to accept anything. You don't have to accept. Accepting is, well, I'm just going to accept this. And so receiving is. You don't have no say-so about it. The receiving is just stop obstructing it, stop refusing it. So it's like looking at the clouds. You don't have to accept clouds. Clouds don't give a shit. Clouds are clouds. The clouds are just there. So if you're looking at them, you're just receiving them. There's no big celebration. There's no credential. And you could say that at some point, everything you look at, you see it not really separate from, there isn't anything to receive. There isn't anything to give, there isn't anything, there isn't any movement.
Bhaskar from Houston doesn't have a question this evening, but he wants to let you know how much he gets out of your talks and the Q&As. Thank you.
So, thank you, Bhaskar, and it's very important to me and to our Sangha to have you join us. So really appreciate it. Your particular chemistry, your understanding, and your life path and everything. Everyone coming together, it's quite an interesting group of people we have together, and it's really, I don't know of any place where we're in any place in a monastery where people are studying sometimes a couple times a day, plus all the sitting practice we do, and then inviting people to come in. It's very unusual, without charging fees and trying to turn it into some kind of a business. So it's very good to have you participate, and we hope you'll come and visit us again so we can pick your brain. So we can translate some of these Sanskrit words for us. Further questions? We have out of time.
Shoto has one more
Okay, we'll
question.
do one more.
He wants to know what kind of ice cream that we got at Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream
Well, we
in
got-
Chagrin Falls.
We got lavender, what was it?
Wildberry lavender.
Strawberry lavender, peanut butter something or other. Was it something or other?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Buttermilk.
I think we actually probably got altogether probably more than a dozen different flavors. I think I didn't have a dozen. I only had maybe 4 or 5 flavors.
There was 13 scoops in total.
13 scoops in total. That was very good ice cream, and so thank you. Was it Shoka that told us about that? Or?
Shoto.
Shoto. Oh,
Yeah.
Shoto. Okay, Shoto, you're to blame.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Sokuzan, for your teachings.
Certainly.
And we continue to appreciate and depend on your financial support and donations. So please go to our website and help us as you can. Good evening.